To the second reading of our 15th literary festival here at Villanova. I'm really happy to see all these people and really happy to have Diane Gillam here at Villanova to read for us. So this is the second reading in our series this semester, and and I'm Lisa Sewell, and I teach in the English department. I teach creative writing and contemporary American poetry, and I teach with Alan Drew. We teach a class together that runs in conjunction with this reading series. So we have all the writers come to class and have wonderful conversations like we did today, and the students read their work. And Alan, who's at the back of the room there, is the director of the Literary Festival and responsible for putting it all together. And since I won't have the opportunity to do this again, I just want to applaud, give him some appreciation for all his hard work. And he's done an amazing job, and I think we have a really exciting series this semester. And I need to extend our appreciation to all the different departments and programs that support this reading series. Most definitely the College of Liberal Arts and Sciences and the Department of English, and Falvey Library, which has graciously let us hold this reading here, as well as Africana Studies, the Honors Program, the Writing Center, Modern Language and Literature, and Gender and Women's Studies. And before I turn the podium over to the students from the class who will be introducing Diane, I just want to let you know about the next 3 readings of this series, because I think you'll want to come to them. They're all going to be great. On the very soon, Thursday the 28th, right before spring break, Claire Vay Watkins is going to be here. She's just had a book out called Battleborn, book of short stories that are really amazing. So I think that will be a really exciting reading. And then on the 21st of March, Mary O'Malley, our Heimbold professor for the semester, will be reading. And on the 16th, and she'll be in the President's Lounge. Claire Vay Watkins will be in room 300 in the St. Augustine Center. And our last, reading, big name, Junot Diaz will be here. And he'll be in the cinema in the Connolly Center on the 16th. All the readings are at 7 o'clock. They all have brownies and fruit. So I hope you'll come back for those. And now I'm going to turn the microphone over to the students who will be introducing Diane: Brendan Crovetton and Camila Zrain.
Hello. If I was asked to describe or synthesize Diane Gilliam's Kettle Bottom into a few words, I would unlikely be able to do so. The plain facts would dictate that it is about the West Virginian mining wars of 1920 and 1921, but to say this would be to say that The Great Gatsby is simply about a fellow named Gatsby. To say the book is also about poverty is too limiting. It seems then that it is best not to summarize, but to explain. Kettle Bottom deals with the conditions of the mines and the hamlets formed around them, the grime and the dirt of the miner lifestyle, the endless death and the cyclical return, and the loss of faith. And from this horror and tragedy, Miss Gillam produces a piece of art. Miss Gillam grew up in Columbus, Ohio, but her mother's family originated from Mingo County, West Virginia, where the mine wars of Kettle Bottom take place. She has a Ph.D. in Romance Languages and Literature from the Ohio State University and an MFA from the Warren Wilson Program for Writers. To create this work, Miss Gillam listened to early mountain music, read narrative histories of people who had lived during the time, and watched the John Sayles film, Mattawan. Among her awards and honors is a listing on the Poetry Foundation bestseller list, the Thomas and Lily D. Chafin Award for Appalachian Writing, the Ohioana Library Association Book of the Year Award in Poetry, and it was recognized by the American Booksellers Association as a Book Sense Top 10 Poetry Pick. That's a mouthful. Kettle Bottom does not immediately appear poetic. The language is often simple and direct, and almost reads like prose. But even with the first poem, Explosion at Winco No. 9, it becomes clear that her work evokes the raw emotion so often attributed to poetry. And that is undoubtedly why it deserves the recognition and honor that it has received. In Pink Hollyhocks, you see the guilt and sorrow felt by a wife who has lost her husband, and the way material objects become keepsakes in the wake of death. One part of the poem that particularly struck me reads as follows. The quilt was ruined. Big oily smudges and coal-black handprints where he hadn't finished washing up. I cried and carried on so when I seen it that morning. He couldn't look at me before he left. It made him feel so dirty and bad. I turned the quilt over on the bed to keep them on me. Harlan's hands. In Walter and His Mama Talk About Angels, a young boy questions the role of angels in a world that is constantly surrounded by death, and whether or not forces of death also have angels. Lastly, in the series of poems spoken by a girl named Pearlie Webb, Miss Gilliam explores how violence and gender roles shape the life of a young girl. To anyone who loves history, literature, or poetry, I would recommend Kettle Bottom.
Hi. As Brendan suggested in his part of the introduction, Kettle Bottom walks the reader through the real life of a community and through an authentic voice illustrates their dealings with loss, pain, and struggling to stay alive. Not only was reading this book of poems such a pleasure, but these poems also challenged and resisted the expectations I had about poetry in general. Because there was so much left unsaid, I was forced to make connections and interact with each poem on a much more personal level. The combination of rich language and the authenticity of voice transported me into the lives of each speaker. Gilliam displays a real gift for using the language to her advantage, creating whole worlds and lives behind each poem. The intensity of the language also helped to portray the darkness of the family's lives and shed light on a period of history that I had never known about. My favorite poem is the extended narrative titled Raven Light. This poem describes the final thoughts of a miner trapped knowing he is about to die. When asked about this poem in an interview, Gilliam related that this poem dealt with a more metaphorical implication of mining, what it means to go into the dark, to go underground into the self rather than into the world. This is a particular poem that stood out to me. It goes as follows. So I guess I'll die. I'm dying right now, and I ain't laughing neither. 20 years ago, and 20 years old and crying into my shirt. I'm glad Gertie can't see me. But when he seen God was really make him die, even Jesus cried and tried to change his mind. I found this poem fascinating in its ability to convey such personal and intimate thoughts about the importance of life and what it means to die. Gilliam is not only a poet, she is an artist. In Kettle Bottom, she intricately and delicately paints a picture of these mining families in my mind. She flawlessly captures the constant contact with an awareness of a life and death danger that these families faced, and she inspired the desire within me to keep working on my poetry so that hopefully one day I can also create such art. It is my honor to welcome Diane Gilliam to Villanova.
Well, I also want to thank Alan, Drew, and also Lisa, and also Susan Peterson, who couldn't be here but picked me up at the airport yesterday, and all of the powers that be that made it possible for us all to be together, because things like this don't happen without a whole lot of people doing a whole lot of work, and I really appreciate every bit of it. And thanks to all of you for coming out, because the work is not complete until it is received, and so your presence really matters. So, Kettle Bottom, let me tell you first what a kettle bottom is. It's sort of the controlling metaphor of the book. What a kettle bottom is a piece of petrified tree trunk that is buried in the mountain. And one that might be about this big could weigh 200 or 300 pounds. And because they're petrified wood and not mineral, nothing in the mountain binds to them to kind of hold them in place. They're what the miners call slick-sided. So those things can just drop through the mine roof and obliterate whatever is underneath them. So it's one of the things the miners are most afraid of because they're just random. I want to tell you a couple things before I I start, and then I kind of get out of the way and let the voices do the talking mostly. To go in means to go in the mine. Sealed in is the miner's term for when there is an accident in the mine, and either because it's too dangerous or too expensive, the companies do not go in and bring the bodies out. They leave the men in the mountain, and they're sealed in. And lastly, black damp. Black damp is a collection of gases that occurs naturally in the mines. It's one of those oxygen-sucking gases. You can't see it, you can't smell it. You don't know it's there, but if you get in it, you've only got a second to get out. So, okay. Now we're going in. Explosion at Winco number 9. Delcy Sawyer knowed Tom Jr. by his toes, which his steel-toed boots had kept the fire off of. Betty Rose seen a piece of Willie's ear, a little notched part where a hound had bit him when he was a young'un playing at eating its food. It is true that it is the men that goes in, but it is us that carries the mine inside. It is us that listens to what all they are scared of and takes the weight of it from them like handing off a sack of meal. Us that learns by heart birthmarks, scars, bends of fingers, how the teeth set crooked or straight. Us that picks up the pieces. I didn't have nothing to patch with but my old blue dress, and Ted didn't want flowery goods on his shirt. I told him, it's just under your arm, Ted. It ain't going to show. They brung out bodies. You couldn't tell. I seen a piece of my old blue dress on one of them bodies, blacked with smoke, but I could tell it was my patch up under the arm. When the man writing in the big black book come around asking about identifying marks, I said, blue dress. I told him, Maud Stanley, 23. This is Edith Mae Chapman, and she is 9. Miss Terry is the company teacher. Oftentimes the coal company would come in. They would build the church, build the schoolhouse, and bring in the teacher. And Miss Terry is from out, as we would say, but her heart's in the right place. So this is Edith Mae. Dear Diary, my teacher, Miss Terry, has given me this little book. For a girl, she says, has got lots of feelings she needs to get out, and maybe she don't want to tell them to the whole world. That is what a diary is for. So I will tell you, dear diary, all my secrets, beginning with Emily Lawson. Every few months, church ladies in Cincinnati sends us at Winco a mission box. Mostly, it is a big lot of nothing can't nobody use. But last time the women began to praise Jesus and clap, for it was all coats. They lit into the box and began to parcel them out, holding them up by the shoulders, seeing what fit who. I just sat quiet, but I seen a blue coat in the pile, so pretty, blue and soft looking, with a black velvet collar, jet buttons like little barrels, and shiny black loops. I didn't say nothing, for it is wrong to covet. But Granny Chapman, she seen me looking, and she said to Mama, well, I do believe that little blue coat looks made for Edith Mae. I knowed Mama might frown, for she don't believe in taking the finest things. The first, she says, shall be last. Granny Chapman looked at her hard, though, till Mama smiled and said, why, yes, Edith Mae, come on and let us see. All the neighbor women said, "Ain't she pretty?" and "Look at them blue eyes," till I felt like a queen. When me and Mama went on home and Daddy seen me in my coat, he commenced to stomping around, for he is hateful of them mission boxes. But Mama caught his eye and shook her head no at him. He just said, "Well," and grunted some and sat back down and looked at me. "Edith May," he said finally, "you are that apple of my eye." I ran over and clumb up on his lap, which I have not for a long time, as I'm 9, and hugged his neck and told him, "Daddy, you are the huckleberry of my heart." Later, when Mom and Daddy was abed, I will tell you, dear diary, I stuck my coat off of the peg to sleep in. It crackled under my back from a letter I found, stuck up under the lining, which says this: "Dear Mountain Girl, my mother has told me how in the coal camps of West Virginia there are girls who do not have dancing lessons, or a new coat every year, or the benefit of scripture, or even supper every day. Mother says I must remember that the last shall be first. So I have kept last year's coat and send you the new blue coat Grandmother Lawson sent me from Boston. I hope it will keep you warm and make you feel not so poor. Very truly yours, Emily Lawson." I don't aim ever to tell, for it is good when Daddy don't stomp and Mama smiles and says, "Edith May, you plenty warm in that pretty coat?" And I say, "Yes, Mama, warm as pie," which is true and not a lie, for it is only my heart that is cold. This is Pearlie. Pearlie is about 14. Pearlie tells what happened at school. "Miss Terry has figured, since we are living in a coal camp, we ought to know geology, which is learning about rocks. Every day we got to pick and bring in a different rock and say what it is. Even our spelling words is rock words, like sediment and petrified. Yesterday, Miss Terry says, 'Who can use petrified in a sentence?' And Walter Colt raises his hand, which he don't never say nothing. He's a little touched, Walter is. Ever since his Uncle Joe, he was the laughingest, sparkliest-eyed man you ever seen. Ever since Joe got sealed in at Leyland, and they ain't never gonna know if he got burned out or gassed or just plain buried. So Walter says, and he'll never look up from his desk, he says, 'Miss Terry, can a person get petrified?' Miss Terry thinks he is sassing her, 'cause she don't know about Joe Coyle, and about how Walter don't never sleep no more, nor hardly eat enough to keep a bird alive, as his mama says. Miss Terry sends him to the cloakroom, but Walter, he just walks on out. I reckon that was the last we'd see of Walter. He come back this morning, though, pockets filled with rocks, and with a poke full of rocks, spreads them all out on Miss Terry's desk before she even asks. 'Well, all right,' she says. 'Suppose you tell us what these are.' Walter stirs the rocks around a bit. It's a gentle. Picks up a flat, roundish one and lays it against his cheek. 'This here,' he says, 'is the hand.' here's Miss Terry. Journal of Catherine Terry, 30 November, 1920. The trump of the last day could scarce cast such terror as the siren. It blew, and the world froze. Children making their way up the hill to the schoolhouse suddenly stopped, staring at each other in some nightmare version of their game of statues. A woman sweeping her porch paralyzed broom mid-thrash. Another, arms half lifted in her reach to a clothesline, face whipped back toward the siren's wail. It lasted only a second, this Pompeii, the terrible tableau vivant. Then everything fell to the ground, clattered terrible. Lunch pails, wash tubs, buckets, brooms, and the world began to pour, as in a vortex, to the drift mouth. It breathed not smoke, but dust. A roof fall, the mouth of the mountain clamped shut, eating its children. The siren merciless. Merciless, the men who got out fighting the rock to get back in, the eyes of the women merciless, watching that mouth for what it would give back or keep. Don't look, I thought, for I had never seen a man die. And wasn't Eurydice lost on account of just such looking down toward the underworld? But their gaze was the only spell they had to conjure faces out of that dark. It pulled like a rope on a well bucket. It was a net flung out between a black sky and a black sea, drawn back empty and flung again. There was nothing else to do. Like Orpheus, I looked. Pink hollyhocks. I turned the quilt over on the bed. When the neighbor women come in to cover the mattress and stop the clocks, hang black crepe over the door frame. Only a pretty thing I had, that quilt. Not an old feed sack quilt, but a wreath of hollyhocks, cut from Aunt Sally's pattern and done up from a piece of double pink Mama brought me from Kermit, soft Nile green for the leaves and new bleached muslin to put it on. I quilted every inch, stitches no bigger than a speck of meal. He wasn't home, night I finished. I put it on the bed, took my clothes off, and got under it. When I heard him in the kitchen, I called and told him it was done. And you know what Mama says, Harlan? You get a wish first night under a new quilt. Got real quiet. Then here he come running. I'd put out the light. He knocked his shin on the cedar chest trying to get to me on the bed. I was fixing to fold it up, get it out of my sight, when the siren blowed. I didn't go. I already knowed. The quilt was ruined. Big oily smudges and coal black handprints where he hadn't finished washing up. I cried and carried on so when I seen it that morning, he couldn't look at me before he left. It made him feel so dirty and bad. I turned the quilt over on the bed to keep them on me, Harlan's hands. So many of the stories in this world are so hard, and I cared about many things as I was writing this book, and one of the things that I also cared about was to show not just the hardness in this world, but some of the wonderful things in this world about this place that I come from. So going to take a deep cleansing breath if you like. And we're going to have just a tiny break in tone from the hard stories. And because one of the things that is so wondrously wonderful about the people I come from is we are really good talkers. You just wouldn't believe how funny we think we are. And I wanted to get that in because this also is a wonderful thing. So this next thing I'm going to read you is called Another Book Report by Pearlie Webb. Now, Miss Terry knows that Pearlie is really smart. And so she has given her extra work to do, which is not Pearlie's idea of what should happen if you are already smart. But teacher said, so she does. She's written one book report before. That's why the title of this book report is Another Book Report. So here we go. Another book report by Pearlie Webb. I did not mean to start nothing with that other book report, Miss Terry. I am glad you like my thoughts, as you say, Miss Terry, but do not figure I go around thinking all the time. I got work to do for Mama. But when I told her the story of Orpheus and Eurydice and how you said to compare it to something in my own experience, Mama got a funny look on her face. She has been queer since the siren, and she has said, sit down, Pearlie, and do it. Okay, real quick. Orpheus and Eurydice have just married, and on the way to the wedding feast, she gets bit by a snake. She dies. He's distraught. He goes down to the underworld and begs to have her back, and they tell him he can have her back, he can lead her back up, but he's got to not look at her all the way up. Well, sure enough, they get almost there, and he has to turn around and look, and she's lost. So this is what Miss Terry has in her mind after this accident in the mine. Well, for Pearlie, she says, this story reminds me of The Farmer's Cursed Wife, which is an old song my Mama Webb used to sing. So now I have to stop and tell you the song a little bit. And don't worry if in certain ways it's a little bit awful, because Pearlie knows what to do with it. So the farmer is out at plow, and the devil comes up out of the ground and tells him that he's going to take one of his family back down to hell with him. And the farmer thinks it's his son, thinks his devil's going to take his son. And the devil says, it's not your son nor your gal I crave, but your old scolding wife, and her I'll have. So the farmer says, welcome, sweet Satan, from the bottom of my heart. So he puts the wife in a bag, and he takes her on down to hell, and she gets down there. And, there's 7 little demons sitting on the wall. She grabbed up a poker, and she thrashed them all. And she grabbed old Satan by the hair of the head. She said, I'd done killed you if you weren't done dead. Till one of the little devils says, you better take her back, Daddy, or we'll all be dead. So the devil goes to take her back, but the farmer sees him coming, and he runs over the hill. He says, if the devil won't have her, be damned if I will. But the devil, being the devil, he catches up. And he says to the farmer and the kids, well, here's your ma'am, and she sure is well, and I'll tell you what, she's tore up hell. And the children, they said, we surely are cursed. She went to hell and come back worse. And the last thing the devil says is, well, I've been the devil for all of my life, but I never been to hell till I met your wife. So this is what Pearlie's thinking about. So she says, this story reminds me of The Farmer's Cursed Wife, which is an old song my Mama Webb used to sing. This song will also make you think of Persephone, for the devil comes up out of the ground to take somebody back down with him. Now, this farmer wants the devil to take his wife, which is like Lot again, only this song makes out like it's funny. So the devil, he takes her down to hell, And this is like Eurydice, who is also a wife and also gets took down to hell. Now, from these two stories, I see two ways for a woman to get out of hell. In the Changes book way, the husband begs and they tell him he can have her back, but he's got to not look at her all the way home. In my own experience, this is a bad thing to tell a man, for you can't hardly keep a man from looking. This ain't much of a deal for her, is what I say. In Mama's song, when the farmer's wife gets down to hell, she starts beating up them little devils, splitting out their brains with a hatchet and such as that, till one of them says, "Take her back, Daddy, she's murdering us all." She gets herself out. And when she gets home, she paddles her old man in the head with a butter stick for sending her down there in the first place. This is very different from Eurydice, who just dies a second death and did not reproach her husband, as it says in the Changes book. I think Eurydice needed her a butter stick. I told Mama and she laughed, but I was not meaning to be funny. I conclude that it is better to be cursed by a husband like the farmer in Mama's song than it is to be loved by a husband like Orpheus. It seems like if you are a wife, you are going to hell, no matter what. But at least in Mama's song, there's one advantage women have over men. A woman can go to hell and come back again. This next poem is in the voice of a World War I veteran. And this letter is written from the Battle of Blair Mountain, which was the point in the labor conflict in which it really devolved into full-fledged guerrilla warfare. And Harding sent gas, like they had used in World War I, to bomb, to put down the miners in West Virginia. The gas canisters did not deploy. He dropped them, but they did not deploy. And so this is called Dear Mr. President, and it's written from Blair Mountain, West Virginia. You do not know me, although according to Sergeant Platt, you were my commander-in-chief when I served in France 1916 to 1917. I was not but 19 when I went to the Great War, but when Sergeant Platt said, "Stand your ground, men," I stood it. Even when the planes come with gas, and I seen them without masks melt down from the inside, screaming like their lungs was a spider web lit on fire. Then I come back here to West Virginia, to the coal mines. I have seen a whole trip car of men dragged by a mule through a pocket of black damp, which is carbon dioxide, if you don't know. The men all lop-headed and limp-armed, same trickle of blood out the corner of their mouth as them boys in France. Now, I look up out of my tent, which Al Burgess has let us strikers set on his place, and again, I see planes of the United States of America waiting for your order to drop their gas on the coal miners of West Virginia. A lot of us down here has been to the war, and all of us has been in the mines. You can't kill us, Mr. President, we all know that. But what in the world makes you think you can scare us? I did quite a bit of research while I was writing these poems, and one thing that I found out that I did not know was that at this time in West Virginia there was a large group of Italians working in the mines. they came in through Ellis Island, and the coal company sent recruiters to Ellis Island, and they put people on trains who did not know where they were going. And so this poem is written in an Italian voice. There's a little bit of Italian in the poem, but the English right around it repeats the Italian, so it's okay if you don't know Italian. Yeah. David. At home in Carrara, Papa, he is mastro di tagliapietra, master stonecutter, maker of beautiful buildings and bridges. Rich men, they knock on our door, asking licenza to enter our house, to talk with Papa about a portico or a piazza. Papa, he loves the stone. He takes me to see the David, for what is Michelangelo, he asks me, if not a stonecutter? La differenza, he says, is that when Papa sees a stone, he sees inside it the face of a beautiful building. Michelangelo, he sees a beautiful man. Then he cuts away from the stone everything that is not David. Papa wants to come here because America is a land of beautiful buildings still hiding in their stones. He believes he can uncover those buildings, scoprire la bellezza nascosta nella pietra. When we arrive, he tells the men with the books, roccia, pietra, and he makes the motion of hitting the stone. They point to a train. When the train stops, they give Papa not a chisel, but a shovel. He shakes his head, no, no, no. But already we owe for the train. Papa tries to pay. He goes every day into the mountain, into the stone. It seals him in, sealed in. The men from the company, they tell Mama the roof it fell. They are sorry. No survivors. Too dangerous to try to bring the bodies out. The rich men here, they see nothing in the stone but money. Non c'è nessuno che vede il mio Papa e gli altri nella pietra. No Michelangelo here to cut the stone away from the beautiful man. I'm going to read one last poem from Kettle Bottom and one newer poem, and then we'll have a chance to talk a little bit. So if there's anything you think you want to ask or talk about, you can start to think about that a little bit. Almost all of the stories and people in Kettle Bottom are imagined, but not this one. This story was told me by my friend Leona Mello, who grew up in a Consul coal camp in Pocahontas County in the 40s. And her mother, Marie Ash, is the name of the woman in the poem who gives the milk. And I read this poem everywhere I go because I want her to be famous. Milk. Mama always said, you can't feed a baby if there's no happiness in the milk. Now, we didn't judge a man by what he had, but by whether he took his pay home before he went to the bar, and Burns Cantrell did not. And he hit Merdy, which wasn't no fault of hers, Mama said. So when she had a baby come in strike time, Mama bought 2 tins of canned milk out of the $1 a week the company store allowed each family for food, and sent me to set them on Cantrell's porch every Monday after Burns had went up the hill. Now, it was the law among the miners that, come a roof fall, you run. Everybody knowed that was how it was. You stop and look back to see who's dead or trapped, you only make more dead. 4 days after the men went back in, there come a bad roof fall, killed 16. Daddy was back behind. Right off, the rocks broke one backbone and his jaw in 5 places. Burns Cantrell was up front. He heard them rocks begin to fall, and he run back into the hole, pitch black, mountain crumbling like the end of the world, and carried Daddy out. He knowed he owed my mama for the milk. And I'm going to finish with a poem in my own voice. This poem is called Where I'm From, and it's after a poem by my friend Georgella Lyon, who's a Kentucky poet. And I just need to tell you 2 things. Hopi in the first line, my mom's name is Hope, but in the family, she's Hopi. And there's a reference to Rumi in the first line. He's a 13th century Sufi poet. He has this idea that we pass through this world the way you would just pass through a tavern at night. He says, I did not come here of my own accord, and I will not leave that way. Whoever brought me here will have to take me home. So that's Rumi. Where I'm from. I'm from Hopi and Odell, from Rumi's anteroom of souls, some kind of late-night wedding chapel where, as my parents married, my soul stood up at the sweetness of their faces. Yes, I said, I will. I do. I am from Sweet Jesus, glowing honey brown on the back wall of the church, and my mother's cousin Darlene leading song service up front, her arms waving like a drum major's. I'm redeemed. I'm redeemed by love divine, by love divine. Glory, glory, Christ is mine, Christ is mine. The men singing the echo part and the sun pouring in all wild. I am from the uncool table of girls who polished rocks, made up songs in little notebooks, and spoke in the language of the once and future king. From learning to say grandma instead of mama, and to not tell about the poke Daddy pulled from the side of the road for supper. I'm from the time I asked Lori Grinstead of the smooth hair and matching clothes a question about English class, and Nancy Grimm informed me. Were you talking to her? I'm from watching my sister-in-law to learn what to wear. I'm from 10 years of graduate school and always only one right answer for every 25 students. From the full professor who said to me as I sat in his office 8 months gone, shame, I was having babies instead of books. I am from my girls who birth me every day into this world. I'm from heart attacks and strokes, from Daddy playing his guitar and whispering hope to Uncle Ted at 3 a.m. in the Morrow County Hospital, and from my cousin Debbie, who punched out the nurse that tried to stop him. I'm from the man who took off his hat when I cried in the elevator in St. Joe's, and from the woman who prayed with my mother in the bathroom at Walmart the 4th day after chemo. I am from the same waiting room as you, the one where God said, who will go to this world I made only out of things that die, and find out for us how much sweetness that adds. And we, all of us, raised our hands. Thank you. So I think we have a few minutes if you all have any questions you want to ask or anything you want to talk about or anything you want me to talk about, I can do it. Uh-huh.
So for the poems for Kettle Bottom, did they come to you more as, say, characters or voices or incidents that you want to talk about? Or were you also thinking in terms of giving a complete story, so I ought to have something about this, or I ought to bring out that?
Both things happened, usually not at the same time. So my best way of understanding what happened to me as I was writing these poems is this. I go to a William Stafford quote where he said at one point that every poem is a miracle that has been invited to happen. So to me, all the research I did and all of the work I did to try to tell the whole story, that was the invitation. And when the voices came, they came as miracles. So, yes to both.
I just kind of want to know if there's a difference in the experience or process when you're writing a book like Kettle Bottom and you're trying to place yourself in the shoes of these people versus if you're writing a poem from your own experience.
Yes, it's very different. In some ways, the distance makes it easier. In some ways, it's easier to speak, oftentimes, the deepest things through a different voice. Because actually, when I start out to write the deepest things, I don't always know what they are. I don't really understand it. I know my own details. I know my own story. But they're not giving me everything I need to understand what's the thing inside that I'm trying to say. But sometimes the stories or the details of another character show me what I couldn't see through my own story. Anything else?
I'd like to ask you, because I'm very awed by the Spoon River anthology. Now, and what you've done here is just a marvelous, insight into like another culture and a multitude of voices. Did anything else influence you in conjuring up how you would come up with this totality here?
I had a book that gave me a moment of inspiration, which is a collection by Ellen Bryant Voigt called Kyrie, which is a collection of poems about the 1918 flu epidemic. And the experience of that is imagined through a community of voices. And my first moment of thinking that I could try a thing like this came from listening to that book. And my own, but also, that came together with my own people, and my own sort of native language, which I was recouping in that moment too. Which I would say to the young writers in the room is one of the richest, most important resources that you have, the way your people really talk. Well, I think I'm going to be back in the back for a few minutes, so if anyone has anything else they would like to ask or talk about, I'd be glad to talk to you about anything you want.
Diane's books are for sale. If you have her book, you can go on.
My pleasure.